For 20 years, Margaret had lived quietly in the same small, ivy-covered house at the edge of town, the kind of place people passed without noticing, with faded paint, an old mailbox, and a front porch that creaked in the wind, and she preferred it that way, because peace, she'd learned, was better than pride. Her son, Daniel, had moved to the city years ago, chasing ambition, marrying a woman named Vanessa, a stunning, sharp-tongued socialite who cared about luxury, status, and how things looked more than how people felt. Vanessa had always made Margaret feel like an inconvenience, visiting only when appearances demanded it, her perfume overpowering the smell of the homemade pie Margaret always baked for her. When Margaret would offer her tea, Vanessa would glance at the chipped cups and wrinkle her nose. When she saw the worn furniture, she'd mutter under her breath, "So quaint," her smile tight and false. Daniel would pretend not to hear, too tired to argue, too desperate to keep peace between the two women he loved. But one autumn afternoon, things took an uglier turn. Vanessa and Daniel had come to visit, bringing with them a shiny new car that gleamed like vanity itself. Vanessa strutted into the house in high heels, her designer purse swinging like a weapon, and after looking around, she let out a laugh, loud, sharp, cruel. "Oh, my God, Daniel," she said mockingly, "you grew up in this? I can't believe you came from this little shack." Margaret's heart stung, but she smiled anyway, as she always did, and said softly, "It's not much, but it's home." Vanessa scoffed, tossing her hair. "Home? It's falling apart. Don't worry, though, once Daniel gets his promotion, we'll buy a real house. Maybe we can help you fix this place up a bit. Or better yet, move you somewhere nicer. A nursing home, maybe?" She laughed again, sipping the tea she clearly didn't enjoy. Daniel looked uncomfortable, murmuring, "Vanessa, that's enough," but she waved him off, saying, "I'm just being honest, darling. It's tragic, really. Your mother has nothing. How did she even afford to raise you?" That last line cut through the air like a blade. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup, but her smile didn't fade. "You're right, dear," she said gently. "I don't have much. But I've never needed much to be happy." Vanessa smirked. "That's what poor people say." The room went cold. Even Daniel couldn't meet his mother's eyes. After a moment, Margaret stood and said, "I'll go check on the pie." As she disappeared into the kitchen, Vanessa rolled her eyes. "She's sweet, but honestly, Daniel, it's embarrassing. You need to teach her some pride." What Vanessa didn't know, what Daniel had forgotten, was that Margaret had once built her pride quietly, away from the world's eyes. Her late husband, Henry, had been a modest man who invested wisely in land and stocks decades ago, and before his death, he and Margaret had decided to live simply, donating much of their wealth to charity, quietly building a trust fund in Daniel's name that he'd never known about. Margaret believed true wealth wasn't meant to be flaunted, it was meant to test people. And that day, Vanessa failed the test miserably. When the pie was ready, Margaret returned, calm and smiling, serving slices with delicate precision, her voice steady though her heart was heavy. As they ate, Vanessa continued bragging about her shopping trips, her luxury vacations, and her upcoming gala, all while mocking Margaret's old curtains, outdated stove, and vintage furniture. Finally, when the evening came to an end, Vanessa stood at the door and said with a forced laugh, "Well, it was humble. But don't worry, Mom, we'll make sure you're taken care of when you get older." Margaret nodded kindly. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear. But I'm quite taken care of already." Vanessa just chuckled dismissively and got into the car, muttering, "Sure, sure." Weeks passed. Then came the day Daniel called, his voice trembling. "Mom," he said, "something happened. Vanessa, she lost her job. The company downsized. We're in trouble. We might lose the house." Margaret listened quietly, then said, "Come visit me tomorrow. Bring her." When they arrived the next morning, Vanessa looked different, tired, makeup smudged, her arrogance dimmed but not gone. "I suppose you're going to enjoy this," she muttered. "Seeing us like this." Margaret smiled. Not at all, dear. Sit down. She handed Daniel a folder. Inside were documents, bank statements, deeds, and a letter from an attorney. Daniel's eyes widened as he read. Mom, what is this? It's yours, Margaret said simply. Your father and I set aside a trust for you years ago. The land we bought was developed. The investments grew. You have more than enough to rebuild your life. Vanessa blinked, speechless. What do you mean? How much? Daniel looked up slowly, his voice barely a whisper. Mom, this says over $7 million. The room fell silent. Vanessa's face turned white, the blood draining as the truth hit her like a truck. The woman she had mocked as poor, pitiful, and unrefined was a millionaire who had chosen to live modestly, not out of necessity, but out of wisdom. Margaret poured herself a cup of tea, the same chipped cup Vanessa had sneered at weeks before, and said softly, money doesn't make people kind, dear. Character does. I wanted to see how you treated me before you ever knew the truth. Vanessa's lips trembled, her fake smile gone. Mrs. Thompson, I didn't mean, Margaret raised a hand gently. You did. And that's all right. We all reveal ourselves in time. Daniel sat in stunned silence, shame flooding his face. Mom, I didn't know, Margaret reached out, squeezing his hand. I know, son. I didn't want you to. Vanessa stammered, we don't deserve, but Margaret interrupted softly, her tone kind but firm. You're right. You don't. But Daniel does. He's still my son. And I forgive you, Vanessa. But forgiveness doesn't erase the lesson. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, not of gratitude, but humiliation. The walls she'd built from pride crumbled. From that day on, everything changed. Daniel began visiting his mother regularly, helping around the house, rediscovering the warmth of the home he'd once taken for granted. Vanessa, humbled, tried to make amends, though it would take years before Margaret truly believed her remorse. The small, ivy-covered house remained exactly as it was, modest, warm, and full of quiet grace, but now, people who passed by noticed it, not because it was grand, but because something about it radiated truth. And sometimes, when neighbors asked Margaret why she never moved into a mansion or bought herself fancy things, she'd smile and say, because you can't measure wealth in money or marble. The richest people I know are the ones who've learned to live with humility. Then she'd glance at the photo of her son and his wife on the mantel, a reminder of the day pride met truth and learned just how small it really was. Months passed after that humbling encounter, and while life slowly found its rhythm again, the tension between Vanessa and Margaret never truly vanished, it merely shifted, lingering like a faint echo of shame that Vanessa couldn't shake no matter how many smiles she forced or apologies she whispered. The revelation that Margaret, the poor, old woman she'd mocked, was not only wealthy but wiser and far more powerful than anyone she'd ever met had shattered Vanessa's entire sense of superiority. For the first time in her life, she couldn't buy respect, charm her way through discomfort, or manipulate perception. All she could do was confront herself, and the reflection wasn't pretty. Daniel had changed too. His mother's humility had opened his eyes, making him realize how far he had drifted from his upbringing, from the lessons of decency and gratitude that Margaret had once taught him as a boy. He stopped attending the extravagant galas Vanessa used to drag him to, choosing instead to spend weekends helping his mother with the garden, fixing the old fence, and cooking dinners in that creaky kitchen that had once embarrassed him. Vanessa would join them at times, though awkwardly at first, as if afraid to touch the chipped plates or sit on the old floral couch. But Margaret's warmth made it impossible to stay guarded for long. She never gloated, never mentioned the incident again. Instead, she treated Vanessa with quiet kindness, offering her tea, recipes, or gentle stories about Henry and the simpler times that built the foundation of their family. One afternoon, as autumn leaves painted the sky with gold, Margaret invited Vanessa for a walk through the small patch of land behind the house, the same land Henry had bought decades ago, which had since turned into a lush, hidden sanctuary filled with apple trees, lavender, and wildflowers that danced in the wind. You know, Margaret